A man is found dead in a ditch off a rural Indiana town road. His cause of death, a mystery. Detectives soon turn to a botanist and discover a rare poison used to murder him. When his wife is notified, she comes across devastated, as new clues lead to a retired law enforcement officer who seems to be neck deep in the thick of it all. My name is M. William Phelps. I'm an investigative journalist and the true crime author of close to 50 books. I've dedicated the past 20 years of my life to helping families of the missing and murdered. Join me. We're crossing the line. Sections of Overdorf Road in Noblesville, Indiana, are what you might expect. Rural, flat, with cornfields, tall as street signs all around you. The road itself is set several feet above grade, with drainage ditches on both sides several feet below. You see a lot of this out in what is one of the more beautiful parts of this country. The corn can grow so high by the end of the season, driving along feels like you've entered a tunnel. As a woman is walking along Overdorf Road on April 24th, 2020, one late afternoon, she passes a rather deeper than normal ditch on the east side of the road near the 21,500 block, and something odd quickly catches her eye. It's close to 3:30 p.m., so there is still plenty of light. Stopping and stepping down into the ditch, the woman realizes almost immediately that what she has come upon is the body of what appears to be a male slightly older than middle age. He's not moving, and there is definitely something alarming about the situation. With her phone in hand, dialing 911, she moves closer to the body and can now see that there doesn't appear to be any sort of outward signs of trauma on the body. No blood, no wounds she can see. And, oddly enough, in an area where there doesn't seem to be a house or anyone close by, there is no vehicle anywhere in sight. So how did he get here? Perhaps he was walking along, stumbled, and hit his head. Or someone stopped and tossed his body out of a vehicle and took off. Police soon arrive and tape off the area. There are several oddities about the crime scene, baffling investigators right away. The victim has no phone, wallet, or identification on him. His pockets have been pulled out like bunny ears, as if he had emptied them for some reason. He is also not wearing shoes or socks. His shirt, apparently a pinkish color, it turns out, is stained with blood. And, get this, the shirt is wrapped around his left wrist. Even more bizarre, a rifle sling is partially wrapped around his entire body. Not for nothing, but he didn't get this way on his own. So there is probable cause to believe that, at the least, this is an unexplained death that needs immediate investigation. Inside the morgue sometime later, investigators focus on a few more interesting pieces of information. On each of his hands, they discover lacerations below the thumb in the fatty portion. The cuts are fresh and clearly made by something very sharp, like perhaps a razor blade. He also has remnants of glue, or what they determine could be tape residue, around both wrists and ankles. One investigator, staring at the residue, makes a comment. The width of the residue is consistent with duct tape. That is not a good sign. The dude's shirt has a hole in the front on the bottom, and the neckline of it has been cut but not removed. Beyond all of that, there is no other signs of trauma to the body. So this is a puzzle, no question about it. How did this man die? And yet, the most important aspect of this investigation in front of them imminently is identifying the guy. It doesn't take long after they fingerprint him and put those prints into the system. David Michael Fouts, just a few weeks shy of his 51st birthday. As they begin to conduct an autopsy on David Fouts the following day, the first big bit of information investigators discover from the pathologist is that Fouts' body was definitely moved. The term they use in the report is, quote, location and position changed after death. So somebody placed his body there on Overdorf Road and then, sometime later, moved it. They determined this by lividity present in the body. Where the blood gravitated toward after death does not match the location he was found in. Then a hint, perhaps, as to how he was murdered. David Fouts' stomach contents include 14 fairly intact chunks of mushroom, and not the white button mushrooms you buy in the store and fry up with a steak. These are different. They send his blood and tissue out for toxicology, and when that comes back, a surprise. The results shed no light on his cause of death. Apparently, those mushrooms did not, at least at this point, contribute to his death. Fouts is married to a woman by the name of Katrina. They've been married since 2019, previous year, but had been dating for 3 years leading up to the nuptials. Katrina has a hard look about her. Puffy bags under her eyes, some obvious wear and tear on her face from what seems to be a difficult life. She and David had been having issues. When investigators approach her the day after David's body has been discovered, Katrina says, David has been having an affair. We've been living apart. He in one home and me in the other. We own both of them together. She also says she hasn't seen David since earlier that week, approximately 6 days before his death. Investigators had run a background check on David Fouts before speaking to Katrina. They seize on something that could be significant in his murder. He had been charged the prior year with domestic battery and invasion of privacy, both crimes reported by Katrina. David denied it ever happened and maintained that he'd never touched Katrina, and he was fighting the charges with everything he had. Their case was headed to court, and they had a date scheduled in the immediate days after David is found dead, which obviously alarms investigators. David was bald across the top of his head with a thick shock of gray hair circling around. He worked at the tech company Salesforce as a senior consultant and technology architect out of its Indianapolis office. In his spare time, he loved cooking and cycling and adored the 4 greyhound dogs he had adopted. He had just bought bikes for his stepdaughter's 2 kids and told her that he was coming back soon to put the cycles together and teach the kids how to safely and properly ride. When she spoke to David on that day, just before he was found dead, the stepdaughter later told the media he was in good spirits, didn't seem to be bothered by anything in particular. She called David the best grandfather the kids could ever have. Investigators then conduct a canvass around the general area where David was found and discover that there was definitely no body in that ditch just before David was found. Several people nearby say they would have seen it. Yet by this point, they believe David had been dead a few days before his body was moved to the ditch. Still, however, they do not have a cause of death. And when asked if the recent domestic violence charge could have had something to do with his suspicious passing, investigators come out and say they don't believe it does, at least at this stage. The one thing gnawing at investigators is those mushrooms found in David's stomach. They have to mean something. Despite the negative cause of death revealed in the short term via toxicology, investigators are not sold on the idea the mushrooms can be ruled out. And so they send samples out for further testing and wind up connecting with a professor of mycology at Purdue and have her analyze the same mushrooms. When she comes back with those results, they learn that the mushrooms are indeed highly toxic and poisonous. They are not mushrooms anyone would eat or even take to get high. With the amount they recovered from David's stomach, they now know David was poisoned to death. Please subscribe to Crossing the Line wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to leave a review of the show, especially on Apple Podcasts. I'm doing this show independently now, free from any corporate or big podcasting media company involvement, which allows me to bring you more of the content you want to hear and have asked me for. This is completely our show. Reviews and subscriptions really help. You are my public relations and social media team now, and without your help, I could not do this. And that support, I must tell you, means everything. It's incredibly humbling. And I want to thank each one of you for listening. We can grow the show together, which will allow me to do even bigger things with it. If you go to crossingtheline.biz or mwilliamphelps.com, you can contact me there to suggest cases or just say hello. And look for me across all social media platforms at @MWilliamPhelps. That's the @ symbol and my name, M. William Phelps. Let's take our first break and come right back. Murder by poison is the preferred method of murder by the female killer. And the most common poison used is medication. Mainly, poisoning someone takes away the risk of any type of physical confrontation, and women are, by and large, in charge of food preparation and generally administer medicines. In addition, many types of poisons are readily available and, most killers believe, hard to detect. When the perpetrator knows the victim, poisoning statistics skyrocket even higher. Investigators looking into David Fouts' murder, of course, know all of this, but also take those poisoning statistics, if you will, and add them to the stats in spousal murder we talk about on this show. And you don't have to be the most effective detective to figure out that your primary suspect has to be Katrina Fouts. She had motive, opportunity, and the means to kill David. Those mushrooms found in David's stomach would cause symptoms leading to death within 5 to 30 minutes after ingesting them. Moreover, 2 of the mushrooms used to poison David would have been enough to kill an average-sized human being. David had 7 large pieces in his stomach and another 7 small pieces. Choosing this method of murder is additionally cruel because dying by the type of toxin found in those mushrooms David's killer used would not be a quick death. David Fouts suffered for a long period of time, knowing he was dying. It takes a special kind of monster to do this to another human being, especially someone you love. The reason why the toxin was not detected immediately is because this specific toxin, and I will not even try to pronounce its Latin name and embarrass myself, but it has a half-life of about 8 hours and is entirely undetectable after 72 hours. So by the time David's body was found, the toxin had all but deteriorated into his system. One of the first things investigators do after realizing that it is more than likely Katrina Fouts played a role in her husband's murder is to get hold of her cell phone. In searching Katrina's cell phone, they find a screenshot depicting a web page with information about that particular and quite rare mushroom used to murder David. And notably, that web page calls this mushroom among the deadliest plants known to mankind. When investigators sit down with Katrina again and talk to her, she blurts out this. David had threatened suicide several times over the last few years. He was just telling me the week before his death that the world would be better off without him. I feel very guilty, she adds, for not having done enough to help him. Throughout the interview, Katrina rings this same bell several times, out of nowhere. This information, they know, contradicts what others in David's life have already told them. Then Katrina floats a second potential motive. She says that a man came into their house looking for David on several occasions. Katrina says that David had an affair the previous year, and she thought the man was associated with that woman David was allegedly having this affair with. They then talk about the two houses David and Katrina own. Katrina calls the second house their country home. When they later search that house, they find a gunsling very much like the one wrapped around David's body. Further digging into her phone, investigators discover several other pieces of information that one would not necessarily be searching for on their phone. One search Katrina conducted is for how bond works in Indiana if you are arrested for murder and what evidence needs to be present in order for a murder warrant to be signed. Then, my personal favorite, how to pass a lie detector test. All those searches were made on April 27th and April 28th, which means after they first interviewed Katrina on April 26th, she began to search the web for ways in which to better understand how to get away with murder. Then Katrina begins telling investigators about a guy who helps to take care of her father. His name is Terry Hopkins. He's been a close family friend for some time, she says. He stops by her dad's house and tends to the old man. Terry Hopkins, it is also clear, had a few run-ins with David because David thought something was going on between Terry and Katrina. 62-year-old Terry Wayne Hopkins had been a Richmond, Indiana police officer for 33 years before he retired a few years before David's murder and wound up hooking up with Katrina. Terry has that old school, good old boy, Midwestern look to him. Completely bald, pudgy face, gray mustache, and scruffy beard, dark eyebrows. You can picture this guy with the police officer Stetson on, pulling you over, stepping out of his cruiser, pulling up his trousers while waddling over to your car to lean down in and say, "Howdy there. License and registration, please." I guess it's interesting to me that Katrina would even bring this guy up during the interview. Investigators are surely asking themselves, again, why would she ring this bell? There is a reason. Now, when investigators begin digging into Hopkins' background and whereabouts over the week prior to David's death, more compelling information emerges. On April 21st, Hopkins purchased what is essentially a murder kit from a local Harbor Freight. Not the smartest dude in the county, which is likely why he was confined to a sheriff's cruiser for his 3 decades of police work and not out chasing bad guys with a gold badge attached to his hip. On that day inside the Harbor Freight, Hopkins buys cleaning gloves, box cutters, knives, duct tape, and microfiber cleaning cloths. By 6:30 p.m. that same night, he purchases those items. Hopkins and Katrina are on their way out to the country home together. They hang out at the house for a bit, and Katrina begins texting David. But he never responds, she later says, and phone records back up. And so Terry and I fell asleep, she explains. Then I returned home around 3 a.m. David and I slept in separate bedrooms, so we came and went as we wished. Who do you think killed your husband? One of the investigators asks. I think it had to be 2 people, she says. I had nothing to do with it, and I do not know for sure who did. When they dig into the phone data from both Katrina and Terry's phones, all sorts of sketchy shit emerges. The location data on Terry Hopkins' phone, for example, was turned on and off throughout that night of April 21st into the 22nd. Katrina and Terry called each other near 3 a.m. and afterward several times. Quick calls, however. Only seconds long. The GPS data on both phones had been turned on and off at various times. All of this clearly indicates that the 2 of them were moving around, driving places, but working hard to keep the phones looking like they are at the country home until about 3:30 in the morning when they split up. How many people spend the night in their homes turning GPS data on and off and also put their phones in airplane mode several times? Exactly. Nobody. Unless, that is, you want to hide your movements and cover up a murder. Then, later into that morning, after Terry and Katrina split up and go their separate ways, several seemingly scripted texts explaining where they both are and how they made it home safely are discovered. When you are an experienced investigator, you look at this type of evidence and you clearly understand that killers, when they are involved in the act, generally don't think ahead and will generally always give themselves away when trying to cover up where they were and what they are saying. It's just clear when you begin to look at this stuff. You look at prior behavior, you look at behavior after, and then you look at that behavior in between, and it just screams at you that they are hiding something. Or in this case, trying to hide something. On April 23rd, after Katrina and Terry text each other about his glucose levels and glucose monitor and how he needs to watch his sugar, Terry heads back out to Harbor Freight on another shopping trip. The same store. I guess he needs to complete the murder kit. This time he buys 2 blue tarps and a 6,400-pound lifting sling. Later that same day, he goes back to Harbor Freight for a 3rd time. Apparently, he'd forgotten several items. So he buys batteries, zip ties, and a 500-pound hydraulic lift cart. Awful busy guy. Again, Terry Hopkins apparently did not learn a damn thing from over 33 years of police work, because throughout that day, they catch him driving in his truck on several different CCTV cameras. And those videos show him heading toward Overdorf Road. Then they get security camera video from a house on a nearby street to Overdorf Road, close to the block where David's body was ultimately found, and it shows Terry in his truck driving back and forth from Overdorf Road to a corresponding road 4 times at 1:30 a.m. in the morning. I know I ask you this every week, but I just want to say something here. Since my Crossing the Line Presents limited series, 34 Fairview Road, has come out, we have been bad review bombed by people who don't want to face the truth in that case and who attack anyone who even questions that truth. So their leader has gone on to tell them to give the show bad reviews, 1-star reviews. And so that's what they did. I've inquired to Apple and other places about taking those reviews down because there are strict guidelines about that now, but it seems that it hasn't been done. So if you could, I'd appreciate a review of the show that reflects your opinion and your true feelings about what we're doing here. It would mean the world to me. Let's take our final break here. Come right back. Warrants are signed and sealed for Terry Hopkins' residence and vehicles. Terry is home when they show up, so they transport him down to the Wayne County Sheriff's Office. Several texts between Katrina and Terry in the days before focused on the two of them discussing how Terry had fallen and hurt himself. It is an obvious attempt to cover for injuries he likely received while either fighting with David Fouts or transporting his body out to Overdorf Road. It appears that Katrina is the brains and Terry is the muscle in this bizarre, rather childish and amateurish murder plan. All of it is overkill. They go out of their way to try to alibi themselves. They overthink everything. Getting Terry into the sheriff's office, they notice all these injuries on him. A scratch on his nose, a large open wound on the top of his right arm, wounds on the back of both his hands, and scratches all over him very similar to what fingernails might leave behind. Among the injuries, the dude has bruises all over his body. Looks like he tangled with a wrestler or fell down a hill and rolled for about 100 yards, or perhaps he tripped and fell while carrying a body. It's clear David Fouts, still able to move after being poisoned, fought with Terry Hopkins. Inside Terry's vehicle, they find a walkie-talkie, matching the same walkie-talkie found in Katrina's vehicle. Both walkie-talkies are set to the same channel. I think these two have watched far too much true crime and crime drama television. After collecting all sorts of trace evidence, the DNA comes back on just about all of it, connecting Terry Hopkins to not David Fouts, but the crime scene. They even tie the shirt David was wearing back to fibers found inside Terry's truck. Like I implied earlier, these two are not the sharpest tools in the shed. Late into May, after Terry is charged with murder, one of the detectives calls Katrina. Look, you have to know at this point, we know that you killed David Fouts. Katrina goes silent for a time, and then in a whisper she says, I know. We just don't understand why this happened. More silence, then, I know, again. Katrina is ultimately found not guilty of murder, but they convict her on conspiracy to commit murder and failure to report human remains. Still, she is sentenced to 34 years for the conspiracy and another year for the failure to report remains. Terry Hopkins died 2 months before his trial was set to begin. Be back here next week. Check out Paper Ghosts and 34 Fairview Road, my other two limited series podcasts. Paper Ghosts, I am happy to say, will be back in the spring with season 5, one of the biggest cases I have ever investigated. Be safe, be aware. Sources for this episode include Hamilton Circuit Superior Court, State of Indiana affidavit for probable cause, State of Indiana versus Katrina Louise Fouts and Terry Wayne Hopkins. Crossing the Line is executive produced by M. William Phelps, LLC, and Matthew Valentinas, Mom's Basement Management. Written by me, M. William Phelps. Audio mastering and mixing by Matt Russell. Original music written and performed by Thomas Mooney, Tom Phelps, and Matt Russell.